Hey, folks, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us. This is the Millstone Report. My name is Paul Harrell, and as always, we can't do the program without you watching every single day. Big news yesterday as we got off the air. We found out this Atlantic story had dropped by, I think a leftist Journo neocon hack by the name of Jeffrey Goldberg, and he thought he had it. He thought he's got this huge story here. And now we have to listen to all of these really CIA intel operatives talk about how in all of my years I've never seen classified info handled like this. Of course, we're now learning, thanks to hearings on Capitol Hill, between John Ratcliffe, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, Kash Patel, that there was not classified info, according, that's their testimony on these signal chats. You guys have all heard the news at this point, but as I start today on the show, my first question really is, what a coincidence. What a coincidence. What a coincidence that this news drops the day before all of the heads of the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI, the CIA, are all scheduled to come before Congress. What a coordination. What a coincidence or coordination. Obviously, this is coordinated. Obviously, the Mockingbird media, the deep state intel oligarchy are desperate here. What's left of them? I mean, I think you could say they're still very much alive. I don't know if they're alive and well. Maybe they are. But there's clearly still an antipathy against Trump's cabinet members. And I think chief of those is obviously JD Vance and Pete Hegseth because, well, let's just put it this way, shall we? When Trump first gets into office, obviously we go back to our mindset. Actually, before he actually gets sworn in, we can go back to all of the appointments, all of the nominees, the ones that we thought were okay, the ones that we thought were terrible, the ones that we thought were good. And you go back and one of the first ones, I guess National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was clearly one of the first appointees that was very disappointing. People do not trust him. People did not trust him, and they didn't think he'd be good for the job. Now, there's a few reasons for that, but if you really want to know why, we can go to National File here, reminding us of this post from, March 24th. But they say Mike Waltz is bad news. As we told you way back in November, we'll follow up on it. Here's a good thread for now. Well, so this thread by somebody calling themselves Bad Kitty Unleashed talks about basically Mike Waltz's wife, okay? A woman by the name of Dr. Julia Neshowit worked for the Atlantic Council, the Aspen Institute, United Nations, World Economic Forum, also a Biden administration staffer, worked for Obama's State Department. She's also very big into climate change. And also Mike Waltz kind of has always been one of these guys to buy the bogus climate change narrative as well, even introducing legislation to, quote, improve coordination on coastal resiliency while advancing climate science research and education to carry our nation toward a more sustainable future. Mike Waltz worked for Dick Cheney. Plus, Mike regularly provided expert commentary on counterterrorism and regional issues for provided commentary at BBC World News, PBS Frontline, The Voice of America. Clearly has ties to these mainstream Mockingbird media, CIA front groups. And then this goes on to say, I just may have to shelve my current project and pick back up one that I never reported on Mike Waltz. Okay, so I guess the point being is Mike Waltz, the reason MAGA was skeptical, was worried when Mike Waltz got the nomination to be the National Security Advisor was because he's a neocon, because he has neocon tendencies. And so now we look at this scandal where now there's news coming out now saying that Mike Waltz did not add Jeffrey Goldberg to the chat, that it was a Mike Waltz staffer that added to the chat. Well, that's a very convenient scapegoat, but the bottom line is this is actually very bad for Mike Waltz out of everybody, even though Jeffrey Goldberg is trying to make this bad for Pete Hegseth and JD Vance. It's clear that they are very comfortable with Mike Waltz and the mainstream Mockingbird media, but they are not comfortable with JD Vance and Pete Hegseth. And again, the whole thing was coordinated. The whole thing is a setup, and you also have to ask yourself how is this going? Like, there is an effort within the White House to stop the leaks, to end the leaks, to figure out who is leaking to the press. This was one of the biggest problems in the Trump administration during his first term. Let's keep going here. Clayton Morris of Redacted responding to Ryan Grimm. The reason that Jeffrey Goldberg's name popped up in a Signal chat for Mike Waltz, is that he was already leaking to Goldberg, an ally in some internal Trump-admin fights, per sources familiar. So these are already some reports that are out there saying, hey, Mike Waltz may be prone to leak. Clayton Moore says, yes, I'm hearing Mike Waltz is a major problem for the Trump team and he needs to go. Okay. What else we got? Will Cain, the biggest takeaway on the Signal story. Yes, there are concerns about this all going down on Signal and accidentally adding Jeffrey Goldberg instead of most probably Jameson Greer, is how thoughtful, collaborative, and honest all these people are. Okay, yeah. We're going to get to that here in a minute because that's the part where I actually thought was pretty interesting. I mean, when's the last time you even get close to this kind of inside baseball about an American attack? And again, they're on Capitol Hill today, all saying that there's not actually classified information or war plans in the documents. But this is probably my favorite thread out of all of them in trying to analyze this left-wing intel oligarch hit job that is clearly coordinated. I kind of wonder how many Signal chats has Jeffrey Goldberg been on this entire time? And oh, by the way, I mean, everybody talks about how Signal is this secure app, and I know it's a Biden administration policy. People have been using this under the Biden administration Signal, but I mean, come on, this idea. I don't know. I mean, the government has backdoor access to all of these technologies. This encryption and everything else. It's all a joke, in my opinion. But. Okay, so Sean Davis of The Federalist, if you actually care about the breach of trust and security in the Waltz Signal affair, as opposed to only caring about whether you can use this to take down people you already hated because of their politics, these are the questions you should be asking or would be asking and demanding answers to. Now, these are very good questions. Who initiated the chat and when did that occur? Who added Goldberg? Now, people say that Mike Waltz added Goldberg. Now people are saying that it was actually a staffer of Waltz that added Goldberg to the chat. It says, when was he added relative to the other members? Whose device was used to add Goldberg? How was Goldberg's information stored in that device? Did Goldberg's number have a different name associated with it in that device? Or if so, what was that name and in which apps was that name used? Did that name belong to anyone else in the chat or anyone working for someone in the chat? How did Goldberg's name appear in the chat? Was it initials? Was it a different name? Was it an accurate name? Question number 9, when did Waltz and or the person who added Goldberg to the chat, if it wasn't Waltz, last communicate with Goldberg and on what topics? Meaning whoever it was that added Goldberg, what else have they been all of those communications need to be looked into. Which media personalities did Waltz and his staff have contact with since learning of the breach, and what was the content of those conversations? Also very good. Very good question. And Sean Davis concludes, he says, if you're not trying to get answers to those questions, you're a hack, not an honest broker. And if you focused entirely on Vance or Hegseth, both of whom are victims of what happened, then it's clear that you have an ideological axe to grind rather than a sincere concern about security, and we can all see exactly what you're doing. Interestingly enough, and we're going to get to this later in the show, there are some, there's this initial interview with Jeffrey Goldberg talking about how it was war plans. I didn't publish everything that I had, but it was war plans. They were sharing war plans. Hegseth denies that it's war plans. Goldberg in an interview last night kind of stepping back about this idea that it was war plans, walking it back a little bit, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. But it occurs to me, what if the administration here just decides to release this whole chat? I mean, it occurs to me that, if in fact there is nothing classified in it and you release it, boy, what a big nothing burger that would be. And you would probably, likely, hopefully expose a leaker. Now, I'm not saying that was the goal of this all along. I'm certainly not saying that. Some people are saying that. All I'm saying is, you remember when Trump released the full transcript? They all accused him when they tried to impeach him with Zelensky and the phone call, and so then he just released the whole transcript. Remember that? And people read it, and there actually wasn't anything in there. Maybe that'll happen again. Who knows? But the MSM is desperate for a new Trump scandal. I know that much. This whole time. It's ridiculous. This whole thing, though, it just is so coordinated, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Before I go any further, I want to tell you about redvivehealth.org/Paul. This is a great company, Red Light Panels. They are responsible for this segment. I'm pleased to partner with Red Vive. This is a way to take back your health with clinical strength panels, red light panels, near infrared light panels you can put directly in your home. And I'll tell you more in depth about them here in just a moment. But in the meantime, go to Red Vive, V-I-V-E, redvivehealth.org/Paul. All right, next up on this list, okay, another one, Sean Davis. I'm a lot less interested in how JD Vance is trying to keep the defense bureaucracy aligned with Trump's foreign policy message and vision, which that did happen, and a lot more concerned about Mike Waltz is regularly talking to Jeffrey Goldberg, a dead-end neocon war pimp who has been involved with every major foreign policy hoax in the last quarter century. This Jeffrey Goldberg guy is the guy that came up with, he pushed the Russia hoax, but he also pushes the very fine people hoax, but also the suckers and losers hoax. That's the one, the suckers and losers hoax, where, he lied about President Trump calling veterans suckers and losers. So this is a good indicator of how this actually really is bad for Mike Waltz. If you go to Mark Levin, who's never met a war that he doesn't like, if you go to the talk radio host Mark Levin's Twitter, he was concerned at first, saying this is a leak. It could be disinformation. In any event, I hope it's not true. Mike Waltz has been a fantastic national security advisor, and he is serving the country and the president superbly. So Waltz is Mark Levin's guy. This is a Politico story with the headline, Waltz's future in doubt following accidental war plan leak. Now, it hasn't even been 24 hours, and according to NBC News, they're reporting that President Trump is saying that Waltz is safe. Everybody's safe. I believe JD Vance and Donald Trump are having they're having lunch here in about 15 minutes, or maybe actually they're in the middle of lunch right now, and they're going to sign executive orders, or Donald Trump's going to sign some executive orders later today around 2 o'clock Eastern. So that's interesting. So then we have this. Glenn Greenwald responding, because Jeffrey Goldberg and Mike Waltz have the exact same foreign policy mindset and always have. So people are making these connections, like National File's making the connection. Glenn Greenwald is making the connection that people like Jeffrey Goldberg and people like Mike Waltz, they have a neocon outlook on life, outlook on foreign policy. And you've got Mike Waltz in there with Hegseth, in there with JD Vance. I mean, if you go read the Vance text messages, it is really interesting how I think JD Vance actually shrines and is trying to keep the America first. Everything about this is all about how this affects America and American interests, true American interests. You can kind of tell that Hegseth wasn't quite on board with bombing the Houthis back to the Stone Age. Sagar and Jetty, can anyone seriously argue that Mike Waltz should not be fired? both responsible for a massive security leak and accidentally reveals he's in regular comms with one of the most prolific neocon journalists in D.C. The chat also shows how JD's restraint was ignored. And so here is Hegseth. Again, Goldberg and others, they want to make this about Hegseth and not about Waltz. But here he is yesterday.
Can you share how your information about war plans against the Houthis in Yemen was shared with a journalist in The Atlantic? And were those details classified?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning. And you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or at shacks in Yemen. President Trump said, no more. We will reestablish deterrence. We will open freedom of navigation, and we will ultimately decimate the Houthis, which is exactly what we're doing as we speak from the beginning, overwhelmingly.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
Right, thank you. Okay, so they don't like that answer. Goldberg doesn't like that answer. This is what he said in response to that.
They were saying that nobody was texting war plans. Given you were privy to this group chat, is that how you saw it?
No, that's a lie. He was texting war plans. He was texting attack plans. When targets were going to be targeted, how they were going to be targeted, who was at the targets, when the next sequence of attacks were happening. I didn't publish this, and I continue not to publish it because it felt like it was too confidential.
So Jeffrey Goldberg here, the editor-in-chief at The Atlantic, says that he's got more. He's got a trove, basically, more documents, more text message threads from Signal that prove Hegseth wrong. So that's what he said on what's her name? What is this show? I can't remember her name, Caitlin or whatever. And then we have this later in the evening going on inside with Jen Psaki. This Andrew Fisher says that this was a very carefully worded response he just gave with Jen Psaki or Psaki or whatever, known deep state operative. He already walked back the war plan hoax, and it sure looks like he's being, what does he say here? He's being played. Okay. Goldberg is trying to blame Hegseth for everything when Michael Waltz is the one responsible for the entire snafu. Yeah, if we say this, and I saw Jack Posobiec was on, before I came on the air, he was on Steve Bannon's show, and he was saying that, hey, this is coordinated and this is a setup. Well, you got to have somebody, if that's true, which I think is correct, you got to have somebody on the inside to set up. You got to have somebody who's actively trying to create another scandal. But here's Goldberg later, and he does sound a little different. Listen.
Responsible here and not disclose the things that I read and saw. I will describe them to you. The specific time of a future attack, specific targets, including human targets, meant to be killed in that attack, weapons systems, even weather reports that the government is I don't know why Hegseth was sharing it with everybody. I mean, the precise detail, and then a long section on sequencing. This is going to happen, then that is going to happen. After that happens, this happens, then that happens, and then we go and find out if it worked. I mean, he can say that it wasn't a war plan, but it was a minute by minute accounting of what was about to happen.
Okay, so that's a little different. You know, he says on Caitlin Collins' show, he says it was a war plan. Now he's saying he can say it wasn't a war plan, but it was a minute-by-minute accounting of what was going to happen. I don't know. Some people are saying, look, he's already realizing that this may not be the big story he thought it was, right? Of course, the left obviously wants another Woodward and Bernstein so bad, which, of course, if you look into the history of Richard Nixon and Watergate, you know that the intel oligarchs were all about setting Richard Nixon up as well. So this is a familiar play for them. There's no doubt about that. Let's see here. Hey, before we go any further, I want to tell you about redvivehealth.org and the great folks over there. These panels, if you get them in your house, these panels can be life-changing. I'm serious. The healing power of light, red light therapy for your health. Red Vive devices emit red and near-infrared light designed to reduce muscle and joint inflammation and pain, stimulate cellular energy, speed up recovery, boost skin collagen, strengthen your body, and boost your mood. Red and near-infrared light are two wavelengths that are naturally emitted by the sun, and in targeted doses, these waves have a healing effect on the body. We've got red light that's absorbed through the skin, leading to enhanced skin health, collagen production, and anti-aging properties. Then you have the near-infrared light, which penetrates deeper into the body, reaching your bones, muscles, tissues, and even organs. And you can do one or the other or both on the panels, and that's why these panels are the best. And you don't just want to go get some red light panel that also doesn't have the near-infrared light. And there are those cheap imitators out there. You don't want those. You want to feel better. You want to look better. You want to perform better. This is for you, and I would encourage all of you to go to redvivehealth.org/Paul. That's redvivehealth.org/Paul. Read their own research there about the health benefits, because they really are, as crazy as it sounds, a catch-all to so many chronic health problems. This is stuff your body needs. We're not designed to sit in cubicles. We're not designed to sit in a studio under the blue light that I sit under all day. Or the computer screens that we sit under all day. You need to put this red light back in your body. You're not getting it. We're not as agrarian as we used to be. You know, people say you need to touch grass. Well, this is a way to I guess, to do that, but with light. And you're helping the show, and you're also getting a great product. And they also have 0% interest financing available. redvivehealth.org/Paul. That's redvivehealth.org/Paul. Let's check out, as we continue with this story, let's check out what President Donald Trump said yesterday as this Atlantic story broke, shall we? This is what he said.
Your reaction to the story in the Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of the Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had...
Let's hope the USAID money will cause them to go out of business. The lack of USAID money. Again, when I go to the Associated Press, I'm now prompted to donate. I went to my statewide newspaper here in Arkansas, and I've gone there forever, and now I'm being asked to donate. And I just wonder how many of these establishment news media outlets have been surviving with taxpayer money.
What?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Well, it couldn't have been very effective, because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
All right, so I've heard reports since then that Trump was furious with what happened. I've also heard from this. This is the latest. President Trump told NBC News this morning that it was one of Mike Waltz's staffers who added Goldberg to the Signal chat. When asked what he was told about how Goldberg came to be added to the Signal chat, Trump said, quote, "It was one of Michael's people on the phone. A staffer had his number on there." The president expressed confidence in his team, saying he was not frustrated by the events leading up to the Atlantic story. The situation, Trump said, was the only glitch in 2 months, and it turned out not to be a serious one, is what is being reported again by NBC News. There's the article. Trump stands by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, despite disclosing military plans, saying he's learned a lesson. So, that doesn't sound like Mike Waltz is getting the boot or going anywhere anytime soon. There are people, though, on the interwebs, commentators and everything else, that have not been trustworthy of Mike Waltz from day one and are not. And again, if it's true, I mean, if you believe this is coordinated, it's clearly coordinated. If you got eyes, this is coordinated. I don't see how you wouldn't see it. This drops right before the Intel committee chairs are coming up. You have to have somebody on the inside for this to be a coordinated Intel operation with the Mockingbird media. That's what this is. And so you've got somebody on the inside that put Goldberg on this chat. And again, my question would be, how many other chats has Goldberg been on that nobody else knows about? That's another thing to think about. But people don't trust Mike Waltz, and you got to wonder. I'm sorry, we have to ask. I mean, even if it's a staffer connected to Waltz, you have to ask about the neocon philosophy of Mike Waltz lining up with the neocon philosophy of Jeffrey Goldberg, and who is leaking? Who is leaking? I think that's obvious that we have some sort of coordination, and I consider adding a hostile, quote, journalist. I consider adding a rogue CIA Mockingbird media agent to a group chat. I consider that a leak and a setup. And I think all of you would too. Here is, this is Ratcliffe. So this is the hearing that is now going on, or it was going on. It's probably over by now. What a coincidence that all of this takes place the day after this bombshell story, we're told, breaks.
Because this is currently under review by the National Security Council.
Because it's all classified. If it's not classified, share the text now.
As the White House previously
Is it classified or non-classified information on this text?
I can confirm.
Director Radcliffe, were you on the group chat?
Senator, I was on a signal messaging group.
So you were the John Ratcliffe on that chat?
I was.
Thank you.
Can I provide some context, Senator, to that?
Yes, but I've got a series of questions.
Well, but I think it's important because at the outset you made a couple of comments about signal messaging using encrypted apps. So that we're clear, one of the first things that happened when I was confirmed as CIA director was signal was loaded onto my computer at the CIA, as it is for most CIA officers. One of the things that I was briefed on very early, Senator, was by the CIA records management folks about the use of signal as a permissible work use. It is. That is a practice that preceded the current administration to the Biden administration.
Director Radcliffe, I've got a series of questions. If you're making the statement, if you're making the statement, the signal is a secure channel.
No, can I answer that? It is.
I've got a series of
decryption. So
it is. I understand.
It is permissible to use to communicate and coordinate for work purposes, provided, Senator, that any decisions that are made are also recorded through formal channels. So those were procedures that were implemented. My staff implemented those processes, followed those processes, complied with those processes, and finally, just please. So my communications, to be clear, in the signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
So this is what's come out of the hearings today. Both Tulsi Gabbard, also John Ratcliffe of the CIA, saying that there was no classified information in the signal chat. Ivan Raiklin, otherwise known as the Deep State Marauder, says, as you watch the hearing today, the brunt of the attacks and accusations by the Democrats are on Tulsi Gabbard, and they are trying to get her to say something to hurt Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz. So he takes a slightly different take here. Ivan Raiklin says, notice how no one even mentions the highest-ranking official in the Signal group, Susie Wiles, Why is that? Susie Wiles, of course, is Trump's chief of staff. Interesting. Is Ivan suggesting that maybe Mike Waltz is not the coordinator here? I tell you one thing, this whole thing is at the bare minimum doing the job that the intel oligarchs want, because it's making everybody not trust everybody, if that makes sense, right? An attempt to derail what's going on right now. And you'll understand, if we can get to the end of the program here, you are going to understand just why they're acting the way they are and they're so desperate, because their entire system of government, if you call it a government, their entire crime syndicate is being dismantled in a significant way. It's not completely gone, but it is being dismantled in a significant way, because the Democrat, what is clear to me at this point is the Democrat Party is the party that runs less on principles than the other side. And what I mean by that is the Democrat apparatus exists because they're all getting bribes and they're all getting payouts and they're all getting... That's how their system is maintained, is they are taking care of their friends. That money is drying up, so you're going to have less protesters. You're going to have less people committed to the mission, because if they're not lining their own pockets, they don't really care. And that's what's going on here, and that's why they're desperate to try to derail all of this. That much is clear. And this portion of the Millstone Report is brought to you by Curable Premium Health. You can go to curable.com, that's Kuribl.com, and use promo code Paul20. Check out all their great, fantastic, premium CBD products, and we'll tell you more about that here in just a moment. Interesting take from Ivan Raiklin, always great to read his stuff. He's a friend of the show. Let's actually get to the text messages, shall we? Trump Vance national security team. Let's see here. Here it is. JD Vance tagging Pete Hegseth. If you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again. This was the highlight of this, actually seeing these inside baseball conversations and hearing JD Vance's opinion about Europe and how they're basically in the midst of committing civilizational suicide and they don't share American values of free speech, right? And yet the shipping lanes. So the official narrative is that, like, we got to take out the Houthis because the shipping lanes are unsafe and everything else. And JD Vance is of the opinion here that is affecting Europe. Obviously, it's also affecting Israel. But JD Vance says, let's just make sure our messaging is tight here, and if there are things we can do up front to minimize risk to Saudi oil facilities, we should do it. Pete Hegseth says, VP, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic, but Mike is correct. We are the only ones on the planet on our side of the ledger who can do this. Nobody else even. I wonder who's on the other side of the ledger. Would that be Russia? Nobody else even close. Question is timing. I feel like now is a good time as any, given POTUS directive to reopen shipping lanes. I think we should go, but POTUS still retains 24-hour decision space. Then we have somebody that I guess people are assuming is Stephen Miller, SM, saying, as I heard it, the president was clear, green light, but we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement. E.g., if Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some other economic gain extracted in return, Pete Hegseth says. I agree. What else have, let's see, do we have another text message here? Then we have some more people in there. But one of the things that was also reported in the Atlantic article is what JD Vance said about how the attack was a little inconsistent with Trump's mission. Picking up here in the middle of the article, at this point, a fascinating policy discussion commenced. The account labeled JD Vance responded, Team, I am out for the day doing an economic event in Michigan, but I think we are making a mistake. Vance was indeed in Michigan that day. The Vance account goes on to state 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez. 40% of European trade does. There is a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. And well, that surely is the case. I mean, that this really was what he's trying to say is before you launch some attack, maybe the American people need to know the actual situation, which many of us obviously do not. And I obviously am not a fan of bombing the Houthis because I don't want any new wars to start, right? I'm certainly not a fan with trying to start a war with Iran while trying to normalize relations with Russia. I think that's counterintuitive, but hey, that's just my take on it. That was my take on it when it broke, and it was very disturbing. But Vance is saying here there's information out there that the American people haven't heard before. 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez, 40% of European trade does. There's a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this, as POTUS said, is to send a message. The Vance account then goes on to make a noteworthy statement considering that the vice president has not deviated publicly. So they want to drive a wedge between Vance. You know what is most clear to me of this story about JD Vance out of everything is that JD Vance is Donald Trump's best insurance policy for not getting assassinated based on this statement. That Vance saying, I am not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself, but there is a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc. Pretty incredible. And, of course, they want to use this now to drive a wedge between POTUS and Vance. But notice what he says here. And this is an actual you talk about somebody willing to state their case, but then if the group doesn't agree with you, you defer to the group for the sake of unity moving forward. This is actually a really mature thing to do. It's something I've had to learn the hard way. Basically saying, they don't agree with him. He states his concerns and he says, but I'm willing to go along with the group. I'm willing to support the group. I'm willing to put forth a unified front. In my younger days, I thought that was a terrible thing. But I actually I don't know. I don't know why, but I actually find that honorable now. Obviously, it has its limits. But anyway, so that was a big deal. And then we have stuff like this. I mean, look at this. Former CIA officer. So somebody named Matt Castelli. All right. Former congressional nominee in New York, Matt Castelli, chimes in about this. Hey, former CIA officer here. This is more than loose lips sink ships. This is a criminally negligent breach of classified information and war planning involving the VP and Secretary of Defense and DCIA and National Security Advisor, all putting troops at risk. America is not safe. It's like, okay, if we wanted to, it's like, here we go, former CIA. You're never a former CIA officer here. This whole thing has rogue CIA written all over it. It's a joke. Just like with the Mark Levin situation. Speaker Mike Johnson, what did he think about this this new mainstream media desperation?
What you did see, though, I think, was top-level officials doing their job, doing it well, and executing on a plan with precision. That mission was a success. No one was jeopardized because of it. We're grateful for that, but they will certainly, I'm sure, make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, so that's great and all, but Mike Johnson needs to quit shying away from impeaching judges. I don't know if you've heard that, but what a disappointment that is. Yeah, quit shying away from impeaching judges, please. That would be nice. We would appreciate that. What's going on right now is literally trying to derail the will of the people with the tyranny of the judiciary doing what they're doing to President Trump. Absolutely insane. Folks, before we go any further, I want to tell you about Curable Premium Health and their great products over at curable.com. Actually been talking to the national sales director recently, Justin Finneman. We're going to get him on the show to kind of do a little bit more of a breakdown about all their great products, whether it's their recovery soak, their tinctures, their muscle cream, their sleep gummies. You name it, they've got it over at Curable. One of my favorite, and look at the different bundles they have, and you look at the different shipping options, it's great. But if you want to save 20%, you got to use my promo code PAUL20 This is my favorite product, the Active Muscle Cream. You've heard me talk about it before. This is instant relief. Now, there's also a variation of this product that I also recommend, which is the Roll-On, which is good if you're like actively outside playing sports, in my case, tennis, and you don't want to put like cream on, but you do want the relief, so that's what it's really good for. It's not as thick. But the cream is actually far superior, I think, just in terms of if you're at the house and you got an ache or pain or whatever and you're trying to recover. The sleep gummies are great as well. They've got the CBD in there. They've got the melatonin in there. And it's also important to remember that Curable does third-party testing because Curable plants the hemp, they harvest the hemp, they extract the CBD. They do all of that, and then they send it off. They don't use chemicals or herbicides, the harmful things. They send it off to a third party, and they test it to verify the potency as well as the cleanliness. No toxins in this CBD that you might get. You know, you don't want to go buy your CBD at a gas station, folks, okay? That's what I'm trying to tell you. Curable.com, Curable.com, Kuribl.com. Use promo code Paul20 and save 20%. All right, let's get back to it, shall we, as we wind down? Then we have, let's see, the Conservative Treehouse, the last refuge. Okay, Sundance writing that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz invited leftist journalist Jeff Goldberg to a group chat on Signal discussing Houthi attacks. Again, what is being reported as of this moment is that it wasn't Mike Waltz himself, but it was a Mike Waltz staffer. Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm just reporting you what's out there, okay? According to Goldberg from The Atlantic, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz invited him to a group chat on the Signal app. So this is so Goldberg is the one saying this, and now they're saying, well, it was actually a Waltz staffer who had the phone. Okay. The media is having a field day with the story, and it does have multiple angles that will unfold in the next several days and weeks. The media even claiming the story could take down Mike Waltz. That's not going to happen. Politico speculated, but according to the NBC article, Mike Waltz is in good graces and they're all good. Well, Mike, which is, you know, I just, you know, there's some huge trust gaps here. I mean, we're not, you know, when we say there's people whispering in Trump's ear to go to war with Iran, I would put Mike Waltz firmly in that category, right? Why Mike Waltz would be texting an invite to Jeffrey Goldberg is an issue for later discussion. Generally, given the nature of these things, it is not the principal who sets up the text network, usually a top aide or lead staff. That's good by Sundance to figure that out because that's now what is being alleged, which might indicate Waltz's wife, Julia Neshewit, was involved. But let's put that aside. So was it potentially Waltz's wife who added Jeffrey Goldberg onto the chat? That would be very scandalous if that were the case. Goldberg claims details of war plans were discussed in the group chat. Perhaps so, perhaps not. This is a specific part of the story is refuted by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. What was discussed and further shared and outlined by Breitbart News is a conversation about the strategic reasoning for the U.S. to directly attack the Houthi rebels in Yemen and reopen the sea lanes into and out of the Suez Canal. The EU and Egypt are primary beneficiaries of the U.S. involvement towards stopping the Houthi terrorists from targeting ships in the region. Egypt manages the Suez Canal, and obviously there are some strategic benefits in the region from helping Egypt deal with the Houthi issue, specifically as President Trump seeks to have Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and partners help solve the problem in Gaza. What's the problem in Gaza? Well, mass slaughter, for one. Additionally, they go on, most of the shipping through the region is headed to the European Union through the canal. Reestablishing safe maritime flow of goods economically assists the EU more than any other region. Again, a point of leverage for the Trump administration as President Trump confronts the issue of EU support for a Ukraine conflict he is trying to resolve. These geopolitical considerations show up in the story as JD Vance engaged in the text message discussion. The 18-member group, we've already covered this. We just basically covered this. The text conversation then begins to dive into the geopolitical considerations behind any operation with a myriad of issues to be considered. Let's see here. Anyway, this is a good piece, but man, that stuff about potentially the wife being involved, that's crazy. I mean, that's a pretty wild speculation. But listen to this. When Mike Waltz was selected as National Security Advisor, one of my first outlines included my expectation that Waltz would likely be the first Trump official removed from his position. My thinking at the time was essentially that Congressman Mike Waltz and his wife, Julia Neshowitz, national security background, held traditional interventionist beliefs, neocon tendencies, in combination with ideological alignment with the climate change crowd. The D.C. social circle of Mike Waltz and Julia Neshowitz almost certainly contains friends with Jeffrey Goldberg's outlook and worldview, a Pence-like tribe. How would that interventionalist pro-NATO, pro-industrial military complex social circle balance with a hardline America-first geopolitical policy approach? It's an ongoing question. Up until this issue with Goldberg, both National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have seemed to embrace President Trump's foreign policy, and both have delivered on the execution of that policy. He says, I also find it very interesting that the former Senate Intel Committee chairman, now Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is included in this Signal app chat group as reported, but there are no remarks from him within it. It is important for us to remember the entire apparatus of the D.C. foreign policy establishment, including the legislative branch members who benefit financially from policy, are against President Trump's larger America First geopolitical efforts. The same opposition exists from the EU and NATO traditionalists. An inside story like this is blood in the piranha pool for all those interests who oppose Donald Trump. The content of the chat messaging, at least from what we can see, is a non-issue. However, as the story unfolds, it will be interesting to watch how Mike Waltz responds to questions about his accidental inclusion of Jeffrey Goldberg in the chat group. How exactly did that happen? Well, they're now saying it was, in fact, a staffer, but which staffer was that? Don't you know if it's just some staffer there? Can you imagine if it was an honest mistake? I mean, I don't think it was, but can you imagine if it was, how it's like you had one job, man. You had one job. Also, this satirical breaking news: District Judge has ruled that Jeffrey Goldberg must be added back into the Signal chat. Oh, my goodness. I like that. Folks, before we go any further, we're going to hear from our good friend Mike Lindell back here in about 60 seconds.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. You know, I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupting this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows only $14.98. Queens $18.98. King size only $1 more. Body pillows $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color. So go to MyPillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
All right, so remember that you want to use the promo code PH when you go to MyPillow.com. They got great deals right now, great spring savings. Go use PH, and you'll save big over at MyPillow.com. By the way, we're still in contact with Mike Lindell's team, and they are wanting an interview to come on the program. I can't wait. I've never gotten to interview Mike Lindell, but I've got so many questions just really about how, you know, I guess what's burned into my brain is Lindell standing outside the White House in the midst of the 2020 election fraud with papers and wanting to see the president, and how the media totally mocked him and made fun of him and everything else. And I just thought, man, you know, here's a guy who's trying to save the country, trying to do his part. I don't know. It made an impression on me for sure. Okay, when I woke up this morning, I didn't think that I would say this, but let's check in on Newt Gingrich and see what he has to say. I never thought I would say that, but Newt's an excellent communicator. Obviously been around Washington a long time. This is, if you want to know, the reason I'm playing this is because I feel like this kind of wraps a bow on everything that we've talked about this hour about this Mockingbird media operation against Trump's cabinet and the Signal controversy. The Democrats are desperate. The intel oligarchs are desperate. The Uniparty is desperate. They're watching what they have built over the last 100 years come to a screeching halt and be totally dismantled before their eyes. And they're simply not going to be able to continue operating by bribing, people to be Democrats, really. Listen to this.
There are two different things going on here with the Democrats. The first is they are watching with terror as all the different sources of government money that has propped them up for the last 60 or 70 years, all of it is now being challenged by President Trump and by Elon Musk. I mean, this cuts at the very base of their coalition. And if they can't bribe people, if they can't act corruptly, if they can't take care of their friends, their entire coalition is going to collapse. Second, you have a very large part of the Democratic Party for whom the beliefs you were describing, transgenderism, for example, are religious beliefs.
So he's exactly right. Those two things are the death of the Democrat Party if they don't do something right. They've got to be able to fund and bribe their friends because they're really not that principled. And then the ones in the Democrat Party that are principled are essentially religious, woke, sex, religion crazies that don't want to give up their sexual perversion because they believe a man can become a woman and everything else. A woman can become a man. It's just nuts. So he's right on the money there. But he specifically mentioned, Gingrich specifically mentioned Doge. So I guess over the weekend, I found this clip. You had a Doge staffer being interviewed by Laura Ingraham. And what he found to me is just, this is one of the things that just, as tax season approaches, we got to pay our taxes, we're told, and yet we have this kind of reporting. It is absolutely maddening the waste, fraud, and abuse going on. Listen.
It's hard to really grasp the scale of this because we process at the IRS about the same amount of data as a mid-sized bank. And a typical mid-sized bank will have somewhere between 1 and 200 people in IT, and they'll have an operations and maintenance budget in like the $20 million a year range. We have 8,000 people in IT, and our operations and maintenance budget is $3.5 billion a year. I don't really know why yet, but I will tell you that 80% of that budget...
All right, stop. Well, $3.5 billion a year. Let's see. This was a helpful explanation that I saw. Where Scrooge McDuck, this is Scrooge McDuck explaining what $1 billion is.
Now, how much is in this hat?
Gee, $1 billion? Or more than that.
See what I mean? They were nowhere near. There's only 100,000 here.
$1 billion stacked upright without an accident is about 800 times the height of the Washington Monument. $1 billion on the ground, all stretched out and uncurled, would extend about 4 times around the circumference of the world.
Pick one up each second, day and night without a break. In 32 years you'd have them all, but oh, your back would ache.
1 second of every day, you'd pick up $1 billion in 32 years. Now, I mean, I'm telling you, we've got this, my calculation, the way I describe it, I describe it a little differently. $1 billion equals $27,000 per day for 100 years, with a little money left over at the end of the 100 years. That's also a way to describe it. And they're saying that the IRS's IT budget here, according to Doge, or maybe this is the Treasury, are $3.5 billion.
$2.5 billion a year, maintenance budget in like the $20 million a year range. We have 8,000 people in IT, and our operations and maintenance budget is $3.5 billion a year. I don't really know why yet, but I will tell you that 80% of that budget goes to contractors and licenses. We cannot perform the basic functions of tax collection without paying a toll to all these contractors. We really have to figure out how to get out of this hole. We're in a really deep hole right now. How do we turn this around? We have We have a $3.5 billion operations and maintenance budget. We have a $3.7 billion modernization effort within IT. That's a lot of budget, and we are way beyond any reasonable cost for what you would expect at a private company for this.
What has been the biggest surprise? You, again, Secretary Bessent's, been in the business world as well, but he heard it from me. But when you first saw this, what was the biggest surprise that you found at that Department of Treasury?
I would say it's the disconnect between leadership and the people actually doing the work is a big one. I would say that it doesn't take a lot, just somebody who cares to solve these problems. You find contracts that are 10, 20, 30, 50 million dollars, and you just ask, like, why are we doing this? And everyone's just like, I don't know. And then you cancel it, and then nothing happens. It's just inertia has just taken over.
That's incredible. I know. When I heard the same thing, that was my reaction. It's just like, it's comical. It's so funny that it's that bad. 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollar contract with some third party. What are we spending this money for? Well, I don't know. All right, let's cancel it. They cancel it, nothing bad happens. That's the bribery that Newt Gingrich is talking about. So it's not just USAID. You start cleaning up these third-party contracts, they're being paid for nothing. It's legal. It's a way. It's illegal, I think, if you actually find it, but it's a way to legally reward the friends of big government. And that's why they're freaking out. That's why they're so desperate for this next Trump scandal. They're doing everything they can to try to create infighting. Folks, that's all the time that we have for this edition of the Millstone Report. Thank you so much. God bless everybody out there watching. Unless I'm providentially hindered, I will be wishing you a happy Wednesday. Have a great rest of your day.
The very foundation of the Christian faith is based